My dead wife lives in the walls of our house, protecting her family. I'll miss this place. Our house is more than bricks and mortar. It's us. I often think about those words. Anna's thoughts about our family's home. Feelings she shared before moving permanently into the hospital. From the day of my wife's death in late 2019, the house bellyached persistently. Its belligerent groans were more sinister than the sounds of settling foundations. The creak sounded, to my heart and ears, like wails. I saw Mum blow me a kiss in the mirror last night, my daughter, Cassie, recently told me. I humoured my 12-year-old to aid her grieving process. Perhaps I shouldn't have done so, but there is no rulebook on grief. Well, that's a lie. There may be, but I haven't looked for it. I'm scared to do so. I dismissed my daughter's claims because I didn't believe in spirits. Not until the horrifying events of this past weekend. My son, Jake, is a good kid, but he makes some terrible decisions. That's his prerogative. He's 18 after all, and his mother just died. Still, he's been this way for a while, and the trouble with teenagers is that they have no foresight. That's why Jake never expected the caller we received on Saturday evening. "Hello, Mr. Fletcher," the man at the door said. He was a burly fellow with a leather jacket and an unkempt grey-tinged beard. His hands were balled into fists, and I immediately knew that trouble had come knocking. "Who are you?" I asked. "Oh, how rude of me," the man replied. "I'm Warren Jones, and your son owes me $2,000. I froze in fear. I knew Jake had picked up some bad habits since Anna's death, but I didn't realise that he'd been keeping such despicable company. I'd seen the stoned, vacant look in his eyes when he got home in the early hours of the morning. I knew he'd been taking substances. I just didn't know which ones. Every attempt to communicate with my son had fallen on deaf ears. "Listen, Mr. Jones, I have no idea why my son owes you so much money, but I'll pay you whatever he owes," I promised. That was a mistake. I saw the greedy glint in the barbarian's eyes as he realised he'd set his sights upon a cash cow. A rare fish who was able to feed the shark. "Trouble is," the tormentor began. "Oh, Mr. Fletcher, you need to think about interest, the cost of living crisis. You know how things have been recently. See, it was $2,000 yesterday. Now it's $3. Fine, I firmly said, barricading the doorway to my home. $3,000. If you give me your bank details, Mr. Jones." The man cackled manically, holding his split sides in faux amusement and wiping an eye for added effect. "Oh, Mr. Fletcher," Warren chuckled. "In my line of business, we operate on a strict cash-only basis." "Okay," I said, handshakily clutching my front door. "If you'll let me grab my coat, I'll drive to the bank and—" "Ah," he interrupted, smiling. "The problem with me letting you drive into town is that, you might feel inclined to stop at the police station on the way. Of course, I gave you a fake name, so they wouldn't really have any information on me. Still, my employer doesn't like legal interference." I heard a door creak upstairs, and I knew Jake was on the landing, listening to the conversation. The menacing grin on Warren's face told me that he meant my son harm. I was fearfully seeking an answer, and then I realised I'd overlooked something. The money in Anna's office. I beckoned for Warren to follow me, and the lion hungrily padded into our hovel. I hadn't stepped foot in my wife's office since she died, and it sickened me that I was finally being coerced into doing so by a thuggish lout. What other option did I have? Warren's hand was twitching in the pocket of his jacket, and I was fairly certain that he had a weapon. I needed to protect my family. As I opened the door to my wife's study, I flicked the light switch. The bulb had blown, so the room remained dimly lit. Through the slanted slats of the blinds, however, the day's dying rays of sunlight spilled into the room. Dust-covered books and furnishings were what I had expected to see. What I had not expected to see was a spider plant that had stubbornly tended to itself. The desk plant had sprouted long leafy limbs, which were covering the walls and the floor of the study. A distant memory returned to me. "I'm going to be lost without you," I cried to my wife in the hospital. "I'll be keeping an eye on you," Anna teased. "Make sure you water my spider plant." She must have known I'd forget, I thought, smiling. She kept it alive from beyond the grave. That must be it. "What the?" Warren gasped. "This room's disgusting. Let's hope you've got a treasure trove hidden in here." I frantically rummaged through the drawers of my late wife's desk, brushing spidery strands of greenery out of the way. It didn't take long for me to remember that the money wasn't there anymore. The stash had been our emergency fund, and we'd spent it on Anna's experimental cancer treatment. A last-ditch effort. I gulped. "I need to think." "No," Warren growled. "You need to pay me, Mr. Fletcher, or I'll have a word with Jake." "Screw you," I spat. Warren's eyes glistened, as if I'd finally given him the invitation he had desired since the moment he stepped foot on my porch. The invitation to do something malicious. "What was that, Mr. Fletcher?" Warren asked, taking a step towards the desk. The floorboard strained beneath his weight, and his hand finally slid out of his jacket pocket. As I had feared, Mr. Jones was clutching a deadly instrument. A large kitchen knife. The shadowy figure crept towards me, chortling cruelly. "When I've finished you, I'll take great pleasure in killing your boy. Gutting him as slowly and painfully as possible," Warren promised. The monster lunged at me, and I felt a primal, unyielding fear as I watched the steely blade plunge into the lower left side of my abdomen. I yelled, wrestling weakly with the hefty man, as he shoved me into the desk, thrusting the blade deeper into my torso. "I won't kill your girl," Warren whispered. "I promise you that, Mr. Fletcher. I'm not a monster. I've only come for Jake." And then the door to the study slammed shut. Warren twisted around, but there was nobody else in the room with us. My eyesight was unfocused, and I could feel the life fading from my body, but I know what I saw. The limbs of the spider plant, like trembling arms of the forgotten room, started to move. Warren cried, jumping back from me. I clutched the knife in my abdomen, wanting to inspect the damage, but too transfixed by the inexplicable spectacle before me. The spider plant constricted Warren's ankles, and he screeched in terror as the leafy appendages climbed his body. What is this?" the man hoarsely asked. "How are you?" He gasped in excruciating pain as the leaves of the spider plant tore holes in his flesh and began to creep beneath his skin. I watched the green fingers of Anna's eternal plant. Unnatural nature gushed from his eye sockets, freeing streams of blood from the depths of the man's body. He gagged as the plant burst from his mouth, having ascended his body. Warren Jones continued to spasm for a few more seconds, A few tears, muddied by blood, fell from his eyes. Then the monster lay still, and before I uttered a word or moved an inch, the corpse was dragged into the wall of greenery by the plant's leaves. A terrible truth concealed forever. Moments before I lost consciousness, I saw the door open. My wife was standing there, a phantom form smiling at me before she stepped into a dark opening within the plant. A vision of beauty and dread. I woke to the sobbing faces of Jake and Cassie. They had taken me to the hospital. My son wouldn't look at me, but I told him it was okay. I told him that we wouldn't be hearing from Warren Jones again. I was right, but the horror had only begun. Upon learning that Anna's spectral form was lovingly woven into the very fabric of our home, my worldview changed. I realised that Cassie's stories were not far-fetched at all. I just wondered why it had taken me so long to see my wife's spectre. Perhaps I'd been blind to her presence. She clearly never left. The torment did not end when Warren Jones died. The disreputable deviant didn't act alone, and I suspected, given Jake's nervous demeanour, that it was only a matter of time before his colleagues came looking for him. I was right. The following evening, horror returned to our home. I'm going to tell you something truly dreadful. I need closure. Some of you may not understand that, but I hope you do when you reach the end.
Dad?
Cassie cried. I frantically pulled the cord on the bedside lamp to see my 12-year-old daughter quivering in the doorway. Her face was strewn with tears, and she was bunching the fabric of her pink pyjamas in trembling fingers. I squinted at the alarm clock on my bedside table. It was a little after midnight. "Oh, it's late, Cass. What's wrong?" I asked.
I went downstairs for a drink," she said. "There's somebody at the window."
Without saying another word, I hurriedly slid out of bed, slipped into a pair of joggers, and threw on a t-shirt. Then I seized the only blunt item that sufficed as a weapon, a tall, slender vase. "I want you to go to Jake's room and hide with him," I calmly told Cassie. My daughter nodded her head, sniffling. Then she tiptoed across the black landing. I followed her closely and waited at the top of the stairs until I saw Jake pull her into his room. Then, creeping down the steps, I listened for any sounds of intrusion. The house was eerily silent. I peered through window panes as I started to scour every inch of the ground floor. I wanted to dismiss Cassie's vision of her face in the night, but I knew she wasn't mistaken. I felt it in my gut. Some sort of animalistic sense, perhaps. But as I passed the utility room, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a black shape in the narrow passage beside my house. Breathing heavily, I sank my upper teeth into my lower lip, fervently trying to deaden a brewing scream. I was so distracted by whatever I had seen through the window of the back door that I barely noticed I'd strolled into the kitchen. When I twisted my head to face the windows, which overlooked the garden, my voice finally assumed control and I screeched in terror. Standing outside my kitchen window were 3 dark figures. Black robes cloaked their bodies, and they wore frightful, featureless masks. The still men were illuminated by my row of solar-powered lights, which sprouted from the lawn like blinding flowers. Upon noticing me, however, one of the 3 men spun around and proceeded to slam the sole of a heavy boot on the lights in the dirt. As each one extinguished, the masked menaces slipped deeper and deeper into the darkness, and with the death of the final solar light, I no longer saw anything at all. I darted towards the kitchen's light switch. Obviously, that did very little to help. It may have even given away my position. Some light poured from the kitchen into the garden, however, and I was horrified to see that the 3 men were gone. Before I swallowed the heart that sat in my throat, a wooden groan sounded from the utility room. The back door had been opened. I've no idea how the men unlocked it so stealthily, but I was preoccupied with the patter of footsteps throughout my house. Someone was heading upstairs. Whistling sounded throughout our home, and I prayed that my children were well hidden. I gripped my weapon so tightly that my fingers turned white. Then I proceeded to search the rooms of my house. Every time I entered a new space and turned a light on, floorboards thudded under the weight of unseen intruders. The masked men continuously turned the lights off, so I embraced the darkness. And then my soundless home was disrupted by a pained cough, followed by laughter and rapid footsteps coming down the stairs. I darted into the lobby, flicked the light switch, and finally found myself facing the intruders. One of them was leading my son downstairs with a knife to his throat. The other 2 emerged from the kitchen, joining us in the entryway. Cassie, thankfully, was nowhere to be seen.
"I'm sorry, Dad," Jake sobbed. "This is all my fault." "I'm sorry, Dad," the man with the knife mocked.
"Quiet, Johnny," said another man as he removed his mask.
"Hello, Simon Fletcher. My name's Frankie, and I'm here because I seem to have misplaced my employee. My employee and a truckload of money, for that matter. Please let my son go," I pleaded, placing my weapon on the ground. I can easily get the $2,000. "Yeah? Is that what you told Warren?" Frankie asked. "Where is Mr. Jones, Simon? Let's give him a ring and see, shall we?" My son and I exchanged fearful glances as Frankie produced a phone from a pocket in his cloak and quickly dialed a number. Jake and I knew what was going to happen. A ringtone ricocheted off the walls of our house. A cheerful tone muffled by the green limbs which had spread beyond the office, claiming most of our home's interior. "Oh, this place is mental." "Search for that phone, Mike," Frankie ordered the 3rd man. "It's got to be somewhere in this overgrown hellhole. What happened here, Simon? Judging by your lack of house pride, I wouldn't call you a man with $2,000 in his pocket." "My house isn't what it seems," I warned. "You should leave." Frankie laughed. "You're not in any position to threaten me, Simon." "It wasn't a threat," I said. "It was a plea." "Boss," Mike said, emerging from Anna's study with a phone in his hand. "I found it. No sign of Warren, though. Just this plant that's everywhere." "Mind explaining why you've got my employee's phone, Mr. Fletcher?" Frankie asked. "You think you were begging a moment ago? Let me give you an opportunity to really beg. Show him what I mean, Johnny." With a slight head nod from Frankie, Johnny swung a boot at one of Jake's knobbly shins, bringing my son to his knees. Before I could reach my sobbing boy, Mike knocked me to the floor. The grunt pinned me down before I could move. "I want you to watch this, Simon," Frankie said as I squirmed. "This is what happens when I don't get what I want." Frankie wrapped his gloved fingers around Jake's arm, and my son desperately tried to wriggle free as the boss produced the knife from his pocket. "Please," I bawled, wrestling with Mike. "Anna, help us!" Frankie plunged the blade into Jake's wrist, rapidly severing his hand from his arm. My son screamed as the malevolent man finished the task with very little hacking, and I also unleashed yelps of horror. The spider plant's leaves started to move, but not quickly enough. and it wasn't until the boss finished, mere seconds later, that he noticed the leaves tightening around his legs. What is... Frankie began, screaming as he stepped back from my boy. "Boss!" Mike yelled. I took the opportunity to throw the distracted grunt off my back, and I ran over to my son, whose body was shivering uncontrollably. Jake was fading as I attempted to stem the bleeding from his handless wrist. And whilst I fought to keep my son alive, Frankie met the same fate as Warren. Though my attention was fixated on Jake, I saw a terrifying scene out of the corner of my eye. Leafy tentacles oozed from Frank's orifices, consuming his still-living body. Johnny cried, backing away from the unexplainable scene. The henchman bumped into a family portrait hanging on our wall, and something amazing happened. Amazing, but ghastly. My wife, the miniature figure in the photograph, wrapped her tiny, resin-coated hands around Johnny's throat and pulled him backwards. Screeching, the man disappeared into the frame, and the phantom photograph moved. My wife strangled the attacker until he lay limp, and then she dragged his body out of view. My children and I remained static in the photograph, oblivious to the terrifying events unfolding before us. No, I'm not dying here, Mike promised. The final intruder turned on his heel and ran towards the front door. But as he placed his hands on the woodwork, the fiendish man began to melt into the wood. His hands liquefied. "Let me go!" Mike screamed, vanishing into the door. His sentence trailed off as his lips melded with the wood. Moments later, the rest of his body became a part of the house. Cassie crept downstairs as I dialed 999. We rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. Doctors worked quickly, but Jake's blood loss led to brain damage. He slipped into a coma, and he remains in that state. Cassie and I visit him every day. We have hope. Hope kept alive by something incredible that we saw. "Look, Dad," Cassie whispered, pointing at a vase of flowers on the windowsill of the hospital room. Peonies, Anna's favourite. And when the night breeze tickled the pristine bulbs, the flowers took the form of a woman holding the hand of a young boy. No, a young man. It was undoubtedly Anna and Jake, mother and son. The billowing wind danced across the room, carrying fragile, whistling words to Cassie and me. "Jake's safe," Anna whispered. "He will wake."